And in the way that we often do, we pray, Lord, in your mercy. So good. Jesus taught his disciples to say, give us this day our daily bread. And when we pray that, we recognize we come around my table, your table, our individual tables, where he invites us to move from praying for what we want to what he knows we need, to praying for a desire for him. He is the bread of life. You can't come around that table without also recognizing the needs of others and how he's allowed us to become the resource for so much of that. But listen to it again. Give us this day our daily bread. There's a second table that we need to recognize. It's our table, not just my table, but our table. For those pronouns there are plural. It's us. It's corporate. And so again, there's several moves that need to happen as we're praying this prayer. We move from individual to corporate. Now look back at the Old Testament and you know that God provided manna for his people in the wilderness. They were dependent on him. Not to mention all the complaining that they did. And every morning they would go out and they would gather as much as their family needed for the day. They went out, they did it together. Everyone got what they needed. And if they gathered too much, what happened? It spoiled. God provided. Same thing in the early church. It says in the passage that you just read, they had everything in common. Unity. Unity that just blaring noise declared that he was the king and that there was a new kind of kingdom. Everybody contributed to the needs of everybody else. They became accountable. So when we pray this prayer today, we can't help but recognize there are some that have more than others in community. But we're praying, Lord, today, give us our daily bread. And we become the answer to our prayers as we become community together. Another posture that changes is that we move from being private to public. This was not just prayed in the closet. This was not just prayed in a home. This was not just prayed in a sanctuary like this. These were prayed out in public. The Israelites knew this well. For when you look at the Old Testament, you see them all the time having feasts. The Lord told them to have these feasts over and over again throughout the year. And who was invited? Outsiders, refugees, widows, those who didn't belong. The feasts included all kinds of other people. Same thing in the early church. We saw a private move to public. For where did they gather every day? In the temple courts. And what were the temple courts? They were the same as our third spaces, our Starbucks, our pubs, our public gathering spaces. And so today, we learn that when we pray, give us this day our daily bread, we're not just praying that God provides all that we need. We're committing ourselves to learning to be public or learning to be with, not just doing for. What would it be like if in 2025, our mission groups met more often in coffee shops and pubs and public spaces than in our homes? What would it look like if we had an imagination for our gatherings where we weren't just in here every Sunday morning, but instead we learned to be a corporate people, a community of God's people in which we would become public? One more. We learn that when we pray, give us this day our daily bread, we learn to be not just exclusive, but hospitable. What was Jesus' reputation? A friend of sinners. And what did they call him? A glutton and a wine-bibber. Now to us, that doesn't mean a whole lot. Oh, they're kind of saying some nasty things. To them, it meant something completely different. For when you go back in the Old Testament and you begin to look at what happened to wine bibbers and gluttons, any guesses? They were stoned. They were brought before the elders and they were stoned. Why? Because they were rebellious. Jesus was being called rebellious by the religious leaders. And was he? Oh, you bet. Why? Because he threw party after party and invited the wrong people and did it at the wrong times, at least according to the religious, but not according to him. You see, friends, we are not an exclusive membership. We're not an exclusive club, but we're called to be a people who become public and have an influence. Not to be a building on the corner, but to be a people who are out there being bread to a world that's hungry. We learn what it means to be hospitable, and we invite people to our table. I want to invite you to watch this video before we come to the third table, both for table talk and for me having a conversation. Let's watch this video as we make that transition.
Who do you think prepared the Last Supper?